Welcome to Seize the Mains Daily Answer Writing Initiative by Malhotra's IS Academy. I'm Surbhi Sirdana and I'm taking this lecture discussion on daily answer writing for UPSC and State Civil Services. If you are new to this initiative, you can download the timetable for this initiative till May 3rd from the link in the description below. Also, the compilation of all the discussions of season 1 is available through the link in the description below, so you can download it and keep it safe for quicker revision when mains is there. So moving on, let's see what is the topic for day 37. It is from GS paper 1 and the topic is from history of the world. Let's see what is the question for today. So the question is that the policy of appeasement was the major factor responsible for the outbreak of the Second World War. Justify. Answer in 150 words for 10 marks and send your answers to us in the next 24 hours, that is 1st April 9 p.m. Trying to understand this question, if you have read world history or even if you have not read world history, you will be able to write this answer after this lecture. So the policy of appeasement was undertaken by Western nations, especially leading nations of Britain and France, and it gave a lot of free area to Hitler to expand his geographical boundaries and to make and to turn his motives into a success. So that was about policy of appeasement, and the Western nations did it to avoid the Second World War, because First World War was very disastrous, very violent. So the Western nations did not want a Second World War and neither they could afford it. So they were using this policy of appeasement to avoid the war. Now this policy of appeasement has been asked by UPSC and State Civil Services from time to time, either directly or indirectly. Now you have to justify that why it was responsible for the Second World War. So we will talk only the reasons that led to the Second World War and which were concerned with policy of appeasement here. So let's see how we'll write our introduction. In our introduction, we'll make all the keywords in the question very clear to the examiner. So if he's if someone is reading for the first time, she will also be able to understand it. So we'll talk about policy of appeasement. What was it in the introduction itself? So you can either simply define it or use the names of some politicians here. Here, this is the picture of the then British Prime Minister. We have used his name in the introduction and the picture also. You cannot have the picture in your answer writing, but this is just to make it a bit interesting. So instituted in the hope of avoiding war, appeasement was the name given to policy of Britain and France in the 1930s of allowing Hitler to expand German territory unchecked. So make sure that you highlight or you underline the keywords here, the hope of avoiding war and appeasement. These are the two keywords here. So it was most closely associated with British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. It is now widely discredited as a policy of weakness, yet at the time it was a popular and seemingly pragmatic policy. What does pragmatic mean? Pragmatic means practical. It appeared very practical at that time, and the politicians thought, the leaders thought that they could avoid a second war, but it was perceived by Hitler as a policy of weakness. He perceived it as a sign of weakness of League of Nations, of leaders of Western nations, and then he expanded his geographical territory and his vested interest. So this was about the introduction. Now moving on to briefly discussing about the reasons of policy of appeasement. Why was policy of appeasement being carried out so widely and why did people even support it? So here are the few reasons. You don't have to write full sentences because as you can see, this is just a 150 words answer. So if you are writing this part, the reasons of appeasement, and you surely need to write these parts, then you just have to write the keywords there or use a tree diagram as we always say. Note down the heading here or just write 4 to 5 words for each point. And write down your 5 to 6 points or whatever you have like this. Don't make it a separate section of your answer because this is not the main body paragraph. This is just an additional information for the examiner which will support our main body paragraph, which is why the policy of appeasement led to the Second World War. So First thing was, as we discussed in the introduction also, that it was to avoid the Second World War. So Chamberlain and the British people were desperate to avoid the slaughter of another world war. The devastation left by the First World War forced the European leadership to work for peace and harmony in every possible way. The second one was, Britain was already overstretched by policing its territories that it had, and it could not afford a major war. Neither it could garner a lot of support. France was very weak at that time. Commonwealth support might not have been available to Britain as before. So Britain was overstretched policing its empire and could not afford major rearmament. Its main ally France was seriously weakened, and unlike in the First World War, Commonwealth support was not a certainty. So this was the second reason. Just take out the keywords and write them in your answer. The third one is the feeling of sympathy. The Treaty of Versailles, it was very skewed against Germany. It was skewed in the favor of Western powers. It was it was not very balanced. And the balance was against Germany of that treaty. So many people actually sympathized with Germans, and they thought that whatever they are doing, whatever the small steps they are taking, that is very much genuine, because they do not deserve such a kind of punishment. So many Britons also sympathized with Germany, which they felt had been treated unfairly following its defeat in 1918. The Western powers believed that mistakes were committed in the Paris Peace Conference, and some of the German grievances were quite genuine. So this was your third point, and hence this policy of appeasement was supported even by the general public of Britain for a very long period of time. There were no revolts, there were no questions by the people that why is the government doing it. Winston Churchill did oppose the pacts that were held at that time, and he said that they are dreaded steps being taken by Hitler, but he was not paid heed to. The fourth one is very important, the fear of communism. The fear of communism, after seeing the incidences in Soviet Russia, the fear of communism in eyes of Western nation, it was so high that they dreaded communism more than they dreaded Hitler. So they did not consider Hitler as someone who could be so dangerous, but they considered communism as very much a threat to their survival. So the fear of communism was also behind the policy of appeasement. It was believed that Germany and Italy would act as buffers to check the spread of communism. So anti-communism or anti-Comintern pacts were also signed by Germany. So many British politicians regarded communism as a greater threat than Nazi Germany. Their negative views were reinforced by the brutal show trials in the 1930s in Stalin's Soviet Union. So a common saying at that time was, this was a quote and it was a very common saying here. You can download the PDF for a clear view after you watch the video. The link is available in the description below. So a very common saying was, better Hitlerism than communism. That was the kind of fear, that was the level of dreadedness in the eyes of Western politicians. So they supported Hitler. They thought that he would act, Hitler and Germany and Italy would act as a buffer against communism. And now coming to the justification part, that why was policy of appeasement held responsible for the Second World War. This is your actual justification which has been asked in the question. So this is your actual answer. Here you can use full sentences also and complete your word limit of 150 words. So this part is just one part. We are explaining here that how Hitler was expanding his geographical territory without having any checks. So the policy of appeasement allowed Hitler to destroy the system created by peacemakers after the First World War. Hitler's expansionist aims became clear in 1936 itself, when his forces entered the Rhineland. So that was the first expansion. The Allied powers failed to check the German advancement in Rhineland, which under the Treaty of Versailles and Locarno was to remain demilitarized. So that treaty was not adhered to, and Western powers did not do anything. Rather, in the end, all this geographical expansion was justified by British Prime Minister, which Hitler thought to be a sign of weakness. So 2 years later, in March 1938, he annexed Austria also. And this is in bracket, this is for your explanation, that at the Munich conference, Neville Chamberlain, whose picture was available in the first slide, seemed to have averted war. He averted the war by not standing against Hitler. He said that okay, whatever Hitler is doing is justified, because he very well knew that if he had taken a stand against Hitler, a war would have been inevitable. So hence German occupation of Austria, Czechoslovakia met no resistance from whatsoever from either Britain or France. The next part was the League of Nations, that the League of Nations was supposed to be held responsible. The Western nations were responsible, who were a part of League of Nations, to ensure peace in the world. But they did not take any steps when this expansionist policies of Hitler were being carried out. So this policy played a role in the failure of League of Nations, because Western democracies were supposed to maintain peace by providing meaningful leadership to the League. Backed by German expansionist moves, Italy too attacked Ethiopia in 1935. So this was the extent, one thing followed the other, which was a member of League of Nations. So the failure of the League in stopping the aggression highlighted its ineffectiveness in containing global conflicts. So this added fuel to the fire and fuel to the vested interest of Germany and Italy. Next one is that it allowed Germany, Italy and Japan to come together and form this axis, which created a imbalance of power in the world, disturbed the balance of power in the world, because Germany, Italy and Japan, they came close and they created this axis: Berlin, Rome and Tokyo. Berlin is in Germany, so if you have read world history you might know. So this axis was created and the balance of power was now skewed, it was now destroyed. So the policy of appeasement convinced Hitler that Western democracies had neither the intention nor the capacity. And when people with negative interest find that the other party is weaker, what they do? They expand, they do whatever they want to do, no matter how harm it is causing. So that was the same case with Hitler, because Western nations were not taking a stand even after consecutive annexations of Hitler, even after consecutive events happening at the international level. So the policy of appeasement convinced Hitler that Western democracies had neither the intention or nor the capacity to stand in front of Germany. So he was greatly emboldened by the appeasing attitude. So this motivated him. Last one is, eventually the policy of appeasement drove Hitler to attack Poland on 1st September 1939, as we all know, and with this World War II commenced. It became inevitable, because now a stand had to be taken, war could not be avoided. So everyone came together and World War II started. So ask yourself, and this is a question which is very much asked, and it is very likely to be asked in UPSC also, that do you think had this policy of appeasement had not been in place, World War II could have been avoided? So what is your stand on that? Take that as a homework and write that answer for yourself, that if you have read world history in detail, or whatever you remember from world history, if you read it long ago, so whatever you can remember, just try to write down that, just delete the policy of appeasement from world history part, and how would our history of this 20th century would have looked like. So conclusion has to be very simple, it is a 150 words answer. So you cannot have a very long conclusion, especially in history. You cannot give conclusions, you can just summarize what you have written. So hence the policy of appeasement did more harm than good in the long run. It led the fate of the world to another deadly war. So this is a very simple line. You can write whatever you want in your conclusion and just say that yes, it is justified. This policy of appeasement led to the Second World War, which is very much justified. Now try to write your own answer in just a few minutes or whatever time it takes. You have enough content available in the presentation here. Download the PDF for this presentation from the link in the description below, and share your answers with us. We eagerly wait for your answers, and try to balance your preparation between prelims and mains. Keep working hard, and all the best to you. We'll see you with another discussion tomorrow.